The slap echoed in the crisp autumn air of the park, a sound too sharp, too personal. It was followed by the sickening thud of a teenage girl hitting the damp ground. Lily gasped, the coppery taste of blood filling her mouth. Above her, Kyle Thorne loomed, his face a mask of privileged rage. His friends stood back, a silent, smirking chorus. Some pulled out their phones, not to call for help, but to record the humiliation. A deep, guttural growl ripped through the silence. Max, his black and tan coat bristling, launched himself forward. He was a German shepherd, old now, with a touch of gray on his muzzle and a slight limp from a life lived hard. But loyalty burned in his dark eyes, a fire that time could not extinguish. He slammed into Kyle's legs, not with the intent to maim, but to protect, to drive the threat away from his girl. Kyle stumbled back, his surprise quickly turning to fury. "Get this mud off me!" he screamed. He swung his leg, the expensive leather of his boot connecting with Max's ribs. A pained yelp escaped the dog, a sound that tore through Lily's soul. Max fell to the side, wheezing, but immediately struggled to get back up, his body trembling with effort and pain. His duty was not done. The boy kicked him again, harder this time. The sound was a wet crack. Max collapsed, his breathing shallow, a thin line of red trickling from his mouth. Lily screamed, a raw, desperate sound of pure agony. It wasn't for herself. It was for the loyal guardian who had just given everything for her. John Cutter heard the scream. He stood 100 yards away, before a simple granite headstone that read, "David Miller, Petty Officer First Class, USN, husband, father, brother." John traced the engraved letters of his friend's name, a ritual he performed every year on this date. He was a ghost in this town, a man just passing through to honor a debt that could never truly be repaid. The world had moved on, but John remained anchored to the past, to the dust and fire of a faraway land where he had lost his team, his purpose. The scream cut through the fog of his memory. It was a sound he knew too well. It was the sound of the innocent meeting the cruel. His head snapped up. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, scanned the park. He saw the circle of boys, the girl on the ground, and the still form of the dog. Something inside him, a mechanism long dormant, clicked into place. The hesitation, the emotional detachment he had cultivated for years, evaporated like morning mist. He started moving, not running. It was a walk, but a walk with such speed and lethal purpose that it seemed to devour the ground beneath his feet. The boys around Kyle Thorne saw him coming. They saw the set of his jaw, the cold stillness in his eyes. They saw a man who was not a bystander. He was a reckoning. One by one, their smirks faded. The phones lowered. They took a step back, then another, creating a path. Kyle, still posturing over Lily, didn't notice until John was 5 feet away. "What do you want, old man?" Kyle sneered, trying to reclaim his dominance. John didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the boy, but he was seeing something else. He saw the arrogance of men who believed their power made them gods. He had fought men like that. He had buried them. He stopped directly in front of Kyle. He was not a large man, but he carried an aura of density, of immovable weight. His voice, when it came, was unnervingly quiet. "Step away from her." It was not a request. It was a statement of fact, a declaration of how the next few seconds were going to unfold. Kyle hesitated, his ego warring with a primal instinct of self-preservation that was screaming at him. John's hand moved, a blur of motion too fast to track. He didn't strike. He simply cupped the back of Kyle's neck. His grip was not crushing, but it was absolute. It was the grip of a professional, conveying complete and total control. Kyle's bravado shattered. He felt the strength in that hand, the cold promise of violence held in perfect check. He could feel his own pulse hammering against John's thumb. "I said," John repeated, his voice dropping even lower. "Step away." He released his grip. Kyle stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet, his face pale with a fear he had never known. His friends, seeing their leader so easily dismantled, melted away into the trees. John knelt, ignoring the fleeing coward. His focus was entirely on the girl and her dog. He gently helped Lily sit up, his eyes scanning her for injuries. A split lip, a darkening bruise on her cheek. He could see the shock and terror in her eyes, but also a flicker of something else. Gratitude. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, tears finally breaking free and streaming down her face. "My dog," she whispered, her voice choked with grief. "Max." John moved to the German shepherd's side. He ran his hands expertly over the dog's body, checking for the extent of the damage. Broken ribs, certainly. Possible internal injuries. The dog was in shock, his breathing dangerously faint. But he was alive. The old warrior was still fighting. Max's eyes opened a sliver, and he managed a weak thump of his tail when he saw Lily. John looked from the loyal, broken animal to the weeping girl. He saw her father in her eyes, the same fierce loyalty, the same heart. David had died saving 2 members of their team, including John. He had made John promise to look out for his family if the worst happened. A promise John had tried to keep from a distance, with anonymous checks and quiet observation, believing his own brokenness was a contagion they were better off without. He had been wrong. He looked directly at Lily, his gaze unwavering. The ghosts of his past settled around him, not as accusers, but as witnesses. He made a new vow, a covenant in the quiet of that violated park. "This stops now," he said, his voice imbued with the weight of an oath. "This ends today. I promise you." Lily looked at this quiet stranger, a man who moved with the stillness of a predator and spoke with the finality of a judge. For the first time since her father's death, she felt a flicker of something she thought was lost forever. She felt safe. John carried the dog. He was surprisingly heavy, a dead weight of muscle and bone. Lily walked beside him, her hand resting on Max's flank, her silent presence a prayer for the animal's survival. John's movements were efficient, wasting no energy as he carried the injured shepherd the half-mile to Lily's home. He had learned to conserve everything, motion, words, emotion, in places where waste meant death. Lily's mother, Sarah Miller, met them at the door. Her face, already etched with the permanent lines of a widow's grief, crumbled at the sight of her daughter's bruised face and their beloved, broken dog. John explained what happened in short, declarative sentences. No embellishment, no emotion, just the facts. The assault, the kick, the cowards. He laid Max gently on a blanket on the floor. The nearest emergency vet was 40 minutes away. John knew the dog might not make it. He worked quickly, his hands moving with the practiced calm of a combat medic. He stabilized the dog as best he could, wrapping his ribs and checking his gums for color. "He's a fighter," John said, more to himself than to them. "Just like his first owner." Sarah looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time. "You're John Cutter," she said, her voice filled with dawning recognition. "Dave's friend, from the teams." "Yes," he replied. There was nothing more to say. The phone rang an hour later. They were back from the vet, Max sedated and resting. his prognosis uncertain but hopeful. Sarah answered, her face hardening as she listened. She handed the phone to John. "It's for you," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Mr. Marcus Thorne." John took the phone. He walked to the window, looking out at the quiet suburban street. "This is Cutter." The voice on the other end was smooth, polished, and dripping with condescension. "Mr. Cutter, I believe you had an unfortunate encounter with my son, Kyle, today. There seems to have been a misunderstanding." "There was no misunderstanding," John said, his voice flat. Thorne chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. "Boys will be boys. A moment of youthful indiscretion. I'm prepared to be very generous to ensure this whole unpleasant matter simply goes away. A new dog, perhaps. A payment for the girl's inconvenience. Let's say $50,000. For your silence." John stared out the window. He watched a leaf detach from a branch and spiral slowly to the ground. He thought of David Miller bleeding out in the sand, his last words a plea for John to watch over his daughter. He thought of the arrogance in Kyle Thorne's eyes as he kicked a helpless animal. He thought of the way money was being offered as a solvent for cruelty, a way to wash away sin. "There's a difference between a protector and a predator," John said, his voice a low hum. "A protector will die to defend the innocent. A predator will kill to defend his ego. Your son is a predator." Thorne's silken tone vanished, replaced by a cold edge. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, Mr. Cutter. I own this town, the police, the courts, the schools, everything. You are a ghost. You don't exist here. One phone call from me, and you will disappear. Do you understand me?" John was silent for a long moment. He felt the cold rage coiling in his gut, a familiar sensation he had learned to master and channel. It was not a hot, reckless anger. It was a weapon, precise, patient, inescapable. "No," John finally said. "You don't understand. You picked a fight with a girl and an old dog. You thought you were strong." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "But you didn't see me. You and your son have just started a war you cannot possibly win. I'm not for sale. I can't be threatened. And I don't disappear." He ended the call before Thorne could respond. He turned back to Sarah and Lily. He placed the phone back on its cradle. His face was calm, his eyes clear. The decision had been made. The promise had been given. The war had been declared. "We do this the right way first," he said. "We go to the police." The police station was a small brick building that smelled of stale coffee and bureaucratic indifference. The officer at the desk, a man whose uniform was stretched taut over his belly, listened to their story with a practiced look of disinterest. He took notes, his pen scratching lazily across the form. When Sarah mentioned the name Kyle Thorne, the officer's posture changed. He stopped writing. He set his pen down with deliberate care. "Thorne?" he repeated, as if tasting the word. He looked from John's stoic face to Lily's bruised cheek. He sighed. "Look, kids get into scuffles. It happens." "This was not a scuffle," John stated, his voice level. "It was an assault, and animal cruelty." "He has friends who saw it," the officer countered, already building the wall. "They'll say the girl started it, that the dog attacked him. It'll be his word against hers, and in this town, the word of a thorn carries a little more weight." "So you're not going to do anything?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. The officer leaned back, his chair creaking in protest. "I'll file the report. A detective might give you a call, but I wouldn't hold your breath." They left the station and went directly to the high school. The principal, a man named Mr. Henderson, listened with the same feigned sympathy. He had shifty eyes and the nervous habit of adjusting his tie every few seconds. When he heard the Thorn name, his tie straightening became frantic. "I understand your concern," he said, his words carefully chosen. "But Kyle is an honor student, captain of the football team. His family are great benefactors to this school. We have to be careful not to rush to judgment based on a simple teenage disagreement. My daughter was assaulted on school grounds by one of your students," Sarah pressed, her patience wearing thin. "Allegedly," Henderson corrected smoothly. "And as I said, we will look into it. We will have a conversation with Kyle." John knew what that conversation would be. A wink and a nod. A warning to be more discreet next time. The system was not broken. It was owned. It was a tool designed to protect the powerful, not the innocent. He stood up, signaling the end of the pointless meeting. The intimidation started the next day. It was subtle at first. A black sedan parked across the street from the Miller house, staying for hours before quietly driving away. Lily's social media accounts were flooded with vicious comments, calling her a liar, a freak. Fabricated stories about her began to circulate through the school. John noticed it all. He was trained to see the patterns, to recognize the methodology of a fear campaign. He installed a simple security camera system he bought at a hardware store, positioning the cameras for maximum coverage of the property's exterior. He started walking Lily to and from the bus stop, his presence a silent, watchful shield. 2 nights later, he was woken by a soft sound from outside. Not a threatening sound, just something out of place. He moved from his makeshift bed on the living room couch to the window. In the moonlight, he saw 2 figures near his old pickup truck. He watched as one of them knelt and methodically punctured each of his tires with a knife. He didn't move. He didn't shout. He simply observed. He memorized their builds, their movements, the make and model of the car they slipped into at the end of the street. They were amateurs, hired thugs, a message. The next morning, Sarah found a dead crow on the front porch. A crude, theatrical warning meant to terrorize. Lily saw it and flinched, but John simply picked it up with a plastic bag and disposed of it without a word. His lack of reaction was its own form of defiance. Fear was the weapon they were using, and he refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing it work. The physical escalation came a week after the first incident. John was late picking Lily up from school. A meeting with a potential ally had run long. As he approached the school, he saw them. Kyle Thorne and his 2 friends had Lily cornered against a brick wall at the edge of the school property, away from the main flow of students. Kyle was in her face, his voice a low snarl. "You and your crazy vet friend need to learn when to quit," he said, poking her in the shoulder. "My father can crush you. He'll ruin your mom. He'll make you wish you never opened your mouth." Lily stood her ground, her chin held high, but John could see the terror in her eyes. "Leave me alone," she said, her voice shaking but firm. Kyle laughed. "Or what?" He shoved her hard against the wall. "You'll have that worthless mutt come after me again?" A low growl answered him. Max, who had insisted on walking with Lily that day, despite his still healing ribs, stepped in front of her. He didn't bark. He didn't charge. He just stood there, a low, menacing rumble vibrating in his chest. His eyes were locked on Kyle, an ancient promise of violence in their depths. The boys froze. They remembered the dog's ferocity, even in its current injured state. That was when John arrived. They didn't hear him approach. He moved like smoke. One moment they were focused on the dog, the next, He was there. He placed a hand on Kyle's shoulder. It was the same calm, controlled grip as before, but this time it was harder, the pressure of his fingers digging into the boy's collarbone. Kyle flinched, turning to see the cold fury in John's eyes. It was an expression that transcended anger. It was a look of absolute certainty, the look of a man who had made a decision. "This is your last warning," John said, his voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the air like a razor. "You will not touch her again. You will not speak to her again. You will not even look at her again. If you do, the consequences will be severe and permanent. Your father's money will not be able to find all the pieces of you." He released Kyle, pushing him back a step. The boy stumbled, his face a mixture of fear and indignant rage. He and his friends backed away, their threats dying in their throats, and fled. John knelt and ran a hand over Max's back. "Good boy," he murmured. He looked at Lily, who was fighting back tears of relief and fear. "The right way didn't work," John said, standing up. "So now we do it my way." That night, he made a call. He used an old satellite phone, a relic from his former life that he kept for emergencies. He dialed a number from memory. It rang twice before a voice answered, calm and professional. "Go for Ghost." "Ghost, it's John," he said. The simple use of his first name was a code in itself. It meant this was not a social call. "I need your help, and hammers." There was no hesitation on the other end. "What's the mission?" John explained everything. The girl, the dog, the promise, the untouchable tyrant named Marcus Thorne. He laid out the systemic corruption, the intimidation, the escalation. He left nothing out. When he finished, there was a brief silence on the line. "Standard operating procedure for bullies with money," Ghost said finally. "They think they're bulletproof. When can we be there?" "As soon as you can," John replied. "Bring the kit, the full diagnostic and surveillance package." "Copy that," Ghost said. "Hammer's been bored anyway. He needs something to hit. We're wheels up in 6 hours. Send me the location and a full data dump on Thorne." "Sent," John said, having already prepared the email. "And Ghost, thank you." "We don't leave people behind, John," Ghost said, his voice firm. "Not then, not now. We'll see you soon." The call ended. John felt a surge of grim relief. The odds were no longer stacked. They were beginning to tilt. The next morning, he sought out his next ally. Her name was Sarah Jenkins, an investigative reporter for the local paper, or what was left of it. She had a reputation for being tenacious and unafraid, which meant she was also underpaid and constantly on the verge of being fired. He found her in a small coffee shop, hunched over a laptop, surrounded by piles of paper. He introduced himself and mentioned Marcus Thorne's name. Her eyes lit up with a weary, cynical fire. "Thorne," she said, taking a sip of her coffee. "The man who practically owns the air we breathe in this county. I've been trying to nail him for years. Slumlord practices, union busting, political corruption. I have a file on him that's a foot thick. But it's all circumstantial. Hearsay. People are too scared to go on the record. Every time I get close, a witness recants, evidence disappears, or my editor kills the story for lack of concrete proof." "I have a new story for you," John said. He told her about Lily, about the assault, about the police and the school. He told her about the promise he made. Jenkins listened intently, her journalistic instincts kicking in. A child victim, a decorated veteran protector. It's a powerful narrative, but it's still her word against his. The Thorne machine will chew her up and spit her out in the press. That's why we need more than her word, John said. In your files, are there other victims? Other people he's silenced? She nodded slowly. Dozens. Small business owners he forced out, families whose land he stole through eminent domain abuse, former employees who were fired for speaking up. They're all terrified. Fear is a wall, John said. But sometimes, all you need is one brick to come loose. If one of them is willing to talk, others might follow. They formed a partnership right there in that coffee shop. Jenkins had the names and the background information. John had the skills to approach them, to assess the risk, to offer credible protection and reassurance. Their final key ally came in the form of Ben Carter, a lawyer whose small office was tucked away above a laundromat. A framed Marine Corps flag hung on his wall. Carter was a former JAG officer who now specialized in lost causes. He worked pro bono more often than he got paid, fueled by a stubborn sense of justice and a deep-seated contempt for bullies. When John and Sarah Jenkins laid out the case, Carter leaned back in his worn leather chair and steepled his fingers. "Marcus Thorne," he said with a grim smile. "I've tangled with his legal team before. They're a pack of overpaid sharks who use procedural delays and intimidation to bleed their opponents dry. They file nuisance suits. They bury you in paperwork. They don't fight the case, they fight the person." "Can you beat them?" John asked. "In a straight fight?" "No. Their pockets are too deep. The local judges are in their pocket," Carter admitted. "But we're not going to fight them in a courtroom. Not yet. We're going to fight them in the court of public opinion. And we're going to build a case so airtight, so undeniable, that not even a corrupt judge can dismiss it." He looked at John. "I'm in. There's no fee. Seeing the look on Thorne's face when his world comes crashing down will be payment enough." The team was assembled: the warrior, the investigator, and the lawyer. That night, Ghost and Hammer arrived. They didn't pull up in a flashy car. They came in a nondescript panel van, the kind that no one ever looks at twice. Hammer was a mountain of a man with a gentle demeanor that belied his immense strength. Ghost was wiry and intense, his fingers constantly drumming on any available surface, his mind always processing data. They turned the Millers' small garage into a command center. Laptops, signal boosters, and encrypted communication arrays covered the workbench. Ghost immediately began his work, his fingers flying across multiple keyboards. "Thorne's digital footprint is massive, but it's arrogant," Ghost murmured, his eyes scanning lines of code. "He uses his wealth as a shield, not for sophisticated security. He thinks no one would dare. He's wrong." While Ghost dug into the digital world, John, Sarah, and Hammer began the delicate work of approaching the other victims. Their first visit was to a family who had owned a small diner for generations, until Thorne had forced them out to build a new strip mall. They were hesitant, their eyes filled with a deep, settled fear. "He ruined us," the old man said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Threatened my family. We can't go through that again." John looked at him, his gaze steady. "He's only strong because you're all silent," he said. "He's counting on your fear. But you're not alone this time. We will protect you. I promise." He left them with an encrypted burner phone. "Call when you're ready," he said. They went to 3 more families that day. They got the same response: fear, resignation. The belief that a man like Thorne was invincible. It was disheartening, but John's resolve did not waver. He knew that wall of fear was cracking. He could feel it. The call came 2 days later. It was the old diner owner. "My wife and I. We'll talk," he said, his voice shaking but resolute. What he did was wrong. It's time someone said so. That one brick had come loose. The momentum shifted. With the first family agreeing to speak, Sarah Jenkins was able to convince another. Then a third. A small but growing chorus of the silenced was finding its voice. Ghost, meanwhile, had found a back door into the Thorn Enterprises server. He wasn't just finding financial dirt. He was mapping the entire network of corruption. The payoffs to city officials, the blackmail on the police chief, the donations to the judges. Marcus Thorn felt the shift. He felt the ground beneath his feet beginning to tremble. His usual methods of intimidation were not working. The reporter was digging again, but with a new fervor. The victims he had crushed were stirring, and at the center of it all was the quiet, unmovable presence of John Cutter. Thorn's arrogance curdled into a venomous rage. He saw this not as a matter of justice, but as a personal insult, a challenge to his authority. He decided it was time to end it, to crush this nascent rebellion with one final brutal act of violence that would terrify everyone back into submission. He gave the order to his son. "Fix this," he commanded. "Make them understand that there are consequences. Make the girl an example." Kyle Thorn, fueled by his father's rage and his own humiliated pride, saw this as his chance to prove himself. He wasn't just going to scare the girl this time. He was going to break her. He waited for her. He knew her routine, knew the path she took home from the bus stop. He hid in the dense foliage of an overgrown alley, his heart pounding with a toxic mix of adrenaline and hatred. When Lily walked past, her backpack slung over her shoulder, Max trotting faithfully at her side, he lunged. The attack was sudden and savage. He grabbed her from behind, throwing her to the ground. Max, with a furious bark, launched himself at Kyle, but the boy was ready. He had a heavy-duty flashlight in his hand, and he swung it like a club, catching the dog squarely on the head. Max went down with a sickening crack, stunned and momentarily unconscious. Lily screamed, but Kyle clamped a hand over her mouth. "No one's coming to save you this time," he hissed in her ear, his voice trembling with rage. He hit her. Then he hit her again. He was frantic, out of control, his fists a blur of violence. But Lily was not the same girl he had assaulted in the park. A fire had been kindled in her, a spark of defiance lit by John's promise. She fought back. She clawed at his face, her fingernails digging deep into his cheek, tearing the skin. She kicked and writhed, making it impossible for him to hold her. Her resistance only enraged him further. He slammed her head against the pavement. The world exploded in a flash of white, then faded to a dull, throbbing gray. As her consciousness slipped away, she saw a blur of black and tan. Max was back up. He was staggering, his head bleeding, but his protective instincts had overridden everything else. He sank his teeth into Kyle's arm, biting down with all the strength he had left. Kyle screamed in pain and shock, shaking his arm violently to dislodge the dog. He kicked Max again, finally breaking the dog's hold, and then he ran, leaving Lily unconscious and bleeding in the alley. It was Hammer who found them. John had sent him to shadow Lily from a distance, an invisible guardian. He had been a block away when the attack happened. He arrived to the scene of carnage, his face a grim mask. He radioed John, his voice tight with controlled fury. "John, it's Lily. It's bad. She's unconscious. The dog's down, too. I'm taking them to the hospital." John heard the words over his earpiece. He was in the garage command center with Ghost, looking at a screen filled with Thorn's illegal financial transactions. At Hammer's words, all the noise, all the data, all the strategy faded away. There was only a great, cold silence in his mind. He arrived at the hospital 20 minutes later. Sarah Miller was already there, her face a wreck of tears and terror. A doctor came out and told them Lily had a severe concussion and several broken bones, but she would survive. She was stable. John walked to the window of her room in the ICU. He looked at her small, still form, hooked up to machines, her face swollen and bruised. He saw the bandages on her head, the cast on her arm. He saw the price of his promise, the cost of fighting a monster. All the control, all the discipline, all the walls he had built around his heart to contain the trauma of his past, they all shattered. What filled the void was not grief or despair. It was a cold, pure, clarifying rage. It was the rage of a protector who had failed to protect. It was the final, irrevocable decision to abandon all restraint. He turned to Ghost and Hammer, who stood silently behind him. "The rules just changed," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "He put a child in a hospital bed. He tried to kill my friend's dog. This is over. The by-the-book approach is done." He looked at Ghost. "Find everything. Every piece of deleted footage from any camera in a 5-block radius of that alley. Find the footage from Thorne's own home security. I want to see the boy come home. I want to see the father's reaction. I want it all." He looked at Hammer. "Get Ben Carter. Tell him to prepare. The war goes public. Tonight." Ghost's fingers became a blur. He wasn't just hacking a server anymore. He was waging a digital war. He tore through firewalls, bypassed security protocols, and dove deep into the dark corners of Marcus Thorne's digital life. He found what he was looking for, and more. A traffic camera a block from the alley had caught a fleeting glimpse of Kyle Thorne running, his arm bleeding, his face scratched. A convenience store camera showed him getting into his car, his panic evident even on the grainy footage. But the real prize was on Thorne's own system. Arrogance had made him sloppy. He had a state-of-the-art security system, but he believed it was impenetrable. Ghost peeled it open like an onion. He found the deleted footage from the main gate. It showed Kyle arriving home, clutching his bleeding arm. It showed Marcus Thorne meeting him, his face contorted in fury not at what his son had done, but that he had been so clumsy, so careless as to get caught. Then came the audio from the internal microphones. "Did you handle it?" Marcus Thorne's voice was a venomous hiss. "Oh, she fought back," Kyle whined. "The dog!" "I don't care about the dog," Marcus roared. "I told you to make an example of her, not to get yourself marked up like a piece of cheap luggage. Now we have to clean this up." The recording continued, a damning chronicle of a cover-up, with Thorne making calls to the police chief and his lawyer, orchestrating the false alibi, ordering the destruction of evidence. "I have it, John," Ghost said, his voice quiet with triumph. "I have it all. The assault, the conspiracy, the cover-up. It's undeniable." John nodded. The plan was already forming in his mind. He knew from Sarah Jenkins's research that Marcus Thorne was the keynote speaker at the annual Town Hall Founders' Day meeting that very evening. It was a public relations event, a chance for Thorne to play the benevolent patriarch to the town he secretly strangled. It was the perfect stage. Ben Carter arrived, his face grim. "The hospital ran a rape kit on Lily," he said. "They found Kyle Thorne's DNA under her fingernails. The bite mark on his arm will match the dog's dental records. We have the physical evidence." "We have more," John said, gesturing to Ghost's screen. As Carter watched the footage, his expression shifted from grim determination to predatory glee. "Oh, he's done," Carter whispered. He's not just done. He's buried. John made one more call. To Detective Miller, the one cop in the department John suspected was still clean, hamstrung by a corrupt chief, but holding on to a sliver of integrity. "Detective," John said, "I'm going to give you the case of a lifetime, gift-wrapped. Be at the town hall tonight at 8 p.m. Bring every honest officer you can find, and bring handcuffs." The town hall was packed. Marcus Thorne stood at the podium, basking in the polite applause, a portrait of civic virtue. He spoke of community, of progress, of the bright future he was building for them all. The corrupt police chief sat in the front row, beaming. The school principal was there, nodding along dutifully. The whole rotten infrastructure of the town's power was on display. John, Hammer, and Ben Carter entered from a side door. Ghost was already in the building's control booth, his laptop plugged directly into the audio-visual system. As Thorne was wrapping up his speech, the massive projection screen behind him flickered. Thorne's smiling face was replaced by a grainy image of an alleyway. The crowd murmured in confusion. Thorne turned, his smile faltering. The video began to play, the brutal, silent footage of his son's attack on Lily. Gasps rippled through the auditorium. People stood up, their faces masks of horror. Thorne's face went white. He stammered, calling for security to shut it down, but the image remained. Then the audio kicked in. It was the recording from Thorne's own study. His voice, filled with rage and conspiracy, echoed through the hall. The entire town heard him confessing to the cover-up, to manipulating the police, to his utter contempt for the law and for the girl his son had nearly killed. The back doors of the auditorium swung open. Sarah Miller walked in. Beside her, walking slowly but steadily, was Lily. Her arm was in a sling, a bandage on her head, but her eyes were clear and strong. The crowd parted for them as they walked down the center aisle. Lily stopped at the foot of the stage and looked up at Marcus Thorne, whose face had collapsed into a mask of disbelief and ruin. She didn't need a microphone. In the stunned silence of the hall, her voice carried, clear and unwavering. "I was afraid of you," she said, her voice gaining strength with every word. "You and your son, you used fear to hurt people, to keep them quiet. You thought it made you strong." She took a deep breath. "But I am not afraid of you anymore." As if on cue, Detective Miller and a team of state police officers entered the hall. They moved with quiet efficiency. They walked past the stunned crowd, their eyes locked on their targets. One team went to the stage for a sputtering Marcus Thorne and his now catatonic son. Another went to the front row and placed the police chief in handcuffs. A third found Principal Henderson cowering in his seat. The arrests were quick, professional, and brutally public. The edifice of power that Marcus Thorne had built over decades crumbled to dust in less than 10 minutes, witnessed by the very people he had oppressed for so long. John Cutter watched from the shadows at the side of the hall. He felt no elation, no triumph, just a quiet, profound sense of release. The promise had been kept. The scales had been balanced. The trials were a formality. The evidence was overwhelming. The video and audio recordings, the DNA evidence, the bite marks, and now, the flood of testimony from 24 other victims who finally felt safe enough to speak. Marcus Thorne, Kyle Thorne, the police chief, and everyone else in their network were found guilty on a laundry list of charges, from assault and conspiracy to racketeering and obstruction of justice. The sentences were long. The Thorne empire was dismantled, its assets seized. Justice was not just served, it was absolute. A few weeks later, as life in the small town began to find its new, healthier normal, A teenager knocked on the Millers' front door. He was one of the boys who had stood by and filmed the first assault in the park. He stood on the porch, his head bowed, unable to meet John's eyes. "I'm sorry," the boy mumbled. "I should have done something. I was scared. But that's no excuse. What you did, what she did, it was brave. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." John simply nodded. "It takes courage to admit that," he said. "Go and be better." The boy left, a weight lifted from his shoulders. John had planned to leave after the trials, to drift back into his solitary life. But as he packed his single duffel bag, he watched Lily in the backyard, throwing a tennis ball for Max. The dog, now fully recovered, leapt and ran, his movements joyful and free. The old warrior had a new, peaceful mission. John realized that he did too. He couldn't go back to being a ghost. He had been reawakened. He unpacked his bag. He used the last of his savings, along with a quiet contribution from Ben Carter and a fund started by Sarah Jenkins, to lease a small, run-down farm on the outskirts of town. He started a nonprofit, the Miller Cutter Foundation for Warriors and Guardians. Its mission was simple: to rescue retired military and police dogs and retrain them as service and companion animals for veterans suffering from trauma and for children who were victims of violence. He found his new purpose not in the heat of battle, but in the quiet, patient work of healing, of connecting wounded warriors, both human and canine, with those who needed a protector. The story ended on a warm summer evening, a year later. The air was soft, filled with the scent of cut grass and the sound of crickets. John sat on the porch swing of the farmhouse. Lily sat beside him, reading a book, her face healed and serene. She was volunteering at the foundation, her touch with the traumatized dogs preternaturally gentle. At their feet, Max lay sleeping, his head resting on John's boot, his chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. The storm had passed. The war was over. For the first time since he had lost his team, John Cutter felt the quiet, steady anchor of peace. He was no longer a ghost haunted by the past. He was a man with a home, a protector who had found his pack.